All right. Now you probably have an idea on what you want to make as a video game. And if you've watched some of these other videos, that will help you be able to go ahead and broadcast it. You can actually tell people about it now. And when you tell people about it, there's always this idea of there's going to be the people you work with and the people you're going to try to sell to. Now, the people you try to sell to probably could be put into two categories. One, if he's a publisher, that person's going to take your game and put it out to the world. So you got to sell them on it first, and then they may give you money up front in order to help make that game or make the idea of your game go forward. Then of course there's just the second would be the general audience. So let's take a look at what we're going to do to write down. Now, game design document, as you can see for the second big bullet, is kind of what we're going to work towards. That's going to be everything that we want to put into the game. But before we do that, a lot of times what we have to do is sell the game to a publisher or try to get crowdfunding, whatever. You should first create a high concept document. And this also kind of gets other people on board as well, especially if you're assembling a group or something, or you know, getting employees, that sort of thing. The high concept document sometimes can be, you know, considered a piece of the game design document. And to be honest, almost every document that you create should have the ability to dovetail into the game design document. So let's first talk about the high concept document, then talk about making all the other documents as well. The high concept document you can think of as kind of like your game's resume. It's going to be, as it says, 1 to 4 pages. A lot of times I don't like them one. I'd say go larger first. You can always trim it back. But this is going to be, you know, here's my game. This is what's great about it, sort of thing. You know, you can talk about who's the intended audience. You can talk about gameplay. You should talk about the story. You should and talk about any pieces that would make your game likable, and you have to condense this down into a smaller page format. Sometimes this was referred to as like the the 1-pager or the 5-pager or something. There's a lot of these things called game design documents that are kind of brought down into pages since they eventually go into it. When you're making the high concept document, you should be almost like thinking in terms of like a salesman. So as the resume tries to sell why you're good and why you should get the next job, the high concept document should do the same thing, except now you're representing your game, not yourself, so to speak. A lot of times what's also good in these sort of things is putting in comps. And by that I mean, well, our game is going to be like Fortnite, except it's going to be better. That actually, the first part of that is good. The second part of that isn't so good, because most people will say, we're going to make this but better. Well, you got to show why it's better. But the Fortnite tends to put people on the idea, okay, I'm going to be trying to shoot people and I'm going to be building as I shoot. That's a good way to introduce it. So if you say, I'm going to make a game of Fortnite, but instead of doing building structures, I am going to be building robots, or something like that. So so you have this potential to just send out robots and snipe people or something like that. And now all these robots are going to fight for me, and after I get like 100, I can dominate the map and win these PvP battles. If you know anything about Fortnite, they have this thing called Battle Royale where everybody can just go in and try to fight each other. Okay, so that would be the high concept document, and where it dovetails into the game design document is that it can kind of be like the intro. And then you say, okay, here's our audience. Oh, I'm going to talk about our audience more in page 5. Okay, here is, it's going for the Xbox. Okay, later on in the Xbox, we're going to explain the controllers and everything else that it has to do with the Xbox on page 33. The story is on page 70, and so on and so forth. And if it sounds long, it should be. Game design documents. There's people who will debate whether they should be super long or super short. If you make them shorter, the argument for that is that more people will read them, including your employees. You don't necessarily want everybody to read their game design document, but you want your employees to read it. And that is a good thing, but the problem is if it doesn't explain everything, you're in trouble, and it can lead to a lot of confusion later on. So I tend to argue more for the larger documents. Now, some people might not read it, some might only read a few sections of it, but at least it's there. You know, and if they don't read it, you can say, oh, go read page 94 or, you know, 97 to 103. That will at least allow them to go get it, and they also don't have an excuse. Well, it wasn't written down. What was I supposed to do? This kind of gets it out there, and it gets all the thoughts down, because there are a lot of thoughts that go into a game. And a lot of times, if you leave stuff out of the game design document, it ends up being the last thing you put in the game, and it's usually the thing that falls on its face, most likely at least to fall on its face. These guys can be small. I mean, I've seen them as small as 10 pages, but I've seen them also like around 200 pages, more than that even. And to help kind of make these game design documents, now there are other design documents that you can use. So these 3 documents I would suggest following, and again, letting them dovetail into the game design document. Each one kind of has its own pieces, or each piece or piece of the puzzle. Now, when you look at these, some of them are pretty obvious. So story, you definitely want the story. You might actually want how the player is going to get through the game, where they're going to end up. You can put this in the high concept document, but you're talking literally 2 or 3 sentences. In a game design document, you might elaborate all of this out. Game script document, that does not deal with the story, that actually deals with the mechanics. Scripting in terms of meaning the programming of it. So what rules are you going to use? How are you going to limit the player? How are you going to tile it into the hardware? That sort of stuff can help. You can also develop the challenges that the players will come across. Flow boards are really interesting. So this is an old term. I haven't heard it used as much lately, but it used to mean the combination of flowcharts and storyboards, which suggests that you have to know what flowcharts and storyboards are and are doing them. So flowcharts help you do programming, storyboards help you do animation usually, or those are the traditional parts. Storyboards are a sequence of pictures that create a narrative. Flowcharts say, well, if I do this, then this happens, and if I click on this, then this happens, that sort of thing. Flowcharts use specific shapes to help you out. So if you have an if kind of scenario, if I do this, this happens. If I don't, then this happens. That would require a diamond. Now, on a flow board, you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about the shapes, but you would have to worry about where everything's heading out. So if you use the example of, like, say, a shell menu where you have a new game, load game, save game, exit buttons, all those buttons go somewhere, right? And all those buttons go to a different screen. It might look identical to the screen you're on. It might be a little different. It might be vastly different. That's where the storyboards help you out. You actually draw out these individual pieces, and then it will show you where you're going to, and you'll kind of use these lines of direction that flowcharts are known for. Say, okay, if I push the save button, I'm going to have a little arrow that goes out and goes to another picture of the next menu that I do. If I click the load button, on my picture, I'm going to have an arrow that goes out, and it's going to show me the screen of where I am. You know, it might show the environment. It might show my GUI at that point, that of the inside the game. Those sort of things. And when you do that, you really get a good idea on how to address everything, and also where you're going to end up with dead ends. So in other words, if I hit a button inside the game and it goes nowhere, that means that button is useless inside the game. You know what I mean? So that you can prevent those kind of mistakes, or at least think about them and then create new endings for it. Now, flowboards can be on like large sheets of paper. They can also be on multiple sheets of paper. I've even seen them on walls, literally like 25 by 8 feet tall, where it's just a bunch of sticky notes, and you might get in terms of the storyboard and the narrative, you have these pictures, and those pictures might be on the sticky, and then they might connect to stickies with like maybe a little string, or maybe just like draw a line on the wall or something like that. That can be helpful. I mean, I've seen them on chalkboards and whiteboards too, so that would work as well, because they can spiral out of control. Because essentially what you're doing is just saying every event that can happen in the game, let's plan that out and see where I go. So in other words, if I get to this town, I'm going to run a cutscene. Well, that town is one sticky. The cutscene is a series of stickies that are that you progress through to the town, and then at the end of the cutscene, it shows you something else. So all this stuff can kind of get in. I used to make my students do these flowboards because it really got them thinking about how to make the game and make a more complete game as well. Now, there are other design documents that you can use. These would be things like creating a wiki where everybody can go to. There might be a world or world and character document, those sort of things. Anything that will essentially be a chapter in our game design document can become a document within itself. Now, going back to our original thoughts here, these two should be definitely linked, but think of them in this situation. A high concept document is something that you're going to take and roll with and show people. A game design document is going to be a living, breathing thing. So as you work, the game design document should grow. That means that you don't have to think of this all at once. So don't worry, don't let the game design document frustrate or stunt your game. If you're ready to make a game and you have your high concept document done, and I would suggest that you do that before you start making a game, then start writing the game design document. But if you're spending weeks, months on a game design document and you never get to making the game, don't let it die. Go ahead and make the game. Sometimes that can fuel the game design document and the creativity of the game design document. And also let other people put their 2 cents in. And when they put their 2 cents in, obviously they're going to be more likely to read the entire document. All hands kind of help in that situation, and it shares the burden as well. Okay, so at this point, you're all ready to at least start rolling on a game, and now we're going to start thinking about the pieces that come into play when making a game.